Principal Series 4A. Why Jesus is the false Messiah for Jews.
Was Jesus a false Messiah? No, but it makes sense why people think so. Here's why. As we have seen in the last video, the full completion of prophecy hinges upon the human portion of responsibility. Prophecy exists in a dual fashion because human beings have the freedom to obey or disobey the will of God. Thus, there are two sets of messianic prophecy in the Old Testament. The overwhelming majority of Old Testament prophecy foretells a messianic king who would establish the eternal Jerusalem, publishing peace and prosperity to the entire world. On the flip side, a handful of prophecies testify to the course of the suffering servant. Although these prophecies outline the messianic age in varying detail, as it stands, there are at least 80 prophecies testifying of the reigning king, in comparison to the handful of prophecies of a suffering Messiah. As we can see, the vast number scale between these two sets of prophecies indicates that God's intended plan was that Israel obey the Messiah to establish and inherit the eternal city. As a lot of us are already familiar with the sacrificial lamb prophecies, let's take a look at some of the reigning king prophecies in more depth. One of the most famous messianic passages, Isaiah 9:1-7 states, "In the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has a light shone. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever." As we can see, the prophet foretells an era in which Jerusalem will no longer be in anguish, as the Messiah shall rule his kingdom with order and justice. The Son, who is given to the people of Israel, is positively identified as the Christ due to the various messianic titles bestowed upon him, such as Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. Having, quote, the government upon his shoulder, which, quote, of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, end quote. He will sit upon the throne of David to, quote, order and establish his eternal kingdom with judgment and justice, end quote. Shifting gears to the book of Micah, the prophet outlines the future glorious status of Jerusalem in extraordinary detail. "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. Many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Recorded in Micah 4:1-2. Continuing in the next chapter, the prophet states, "Out of you, Bethlehem, shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. He shall be great to the ends of the earth, and this one shall be peace. They shall shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod and its entrances. Your hand shall be lifted up over your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off. And in anger and wrath I will execute vengeance on the nations that did not obey." It is self-evident what the prophet Micah envisioned when he prophesied of the Messianic age. With the New Jerusalem being established on the peak of the mountains, the law would go forth out of Jerusalem, publishing peace and executing justice among the nations, resulting in a posterity that no longer knows of war. Although it is not possible to cover all the prophecies in this video, the Messianic expectation from the Old Testament cannot be more clear. These 80 prophecies foretell of a time when the declaration of the Lord would culminate into the advent of the righteous branch of David, who, quote, shall reign and prosper, and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. With the incarnation of the Messiah, he would, quote, raise up the booth of David that is fallen and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, in which, quote, the nations will know that I, the Lord, sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. With all nations flown to the house of the Lord, the Messiah would have the government upon his shoulders, and of the increase of his government there will be no end. With the Son of Righteousness with healing in its wings shining behind them, the root of Jesse shall stand as a banner to the nations, executing justice and righteousness in the land. In those days the law shall go forth out of Zion, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve the Messiah, making all his enemies his footstool. Although all nations will serve him, this will not be a tyrannical sovereignty as, quote, the poor among mankind shall exult in the Holy One of Israel, because of the Messiah's peaceful and righteous dominion. Rather than fearing this new sovereignty, the peoples of all nations will rejoice, awaiting the light of Zion to proclaim liberty to those held captive under the iron fist of tyrannical rulers. On that day, 10 men from varying nations will grab a hold of the Jews, saying, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you, because violence shall no more be heard in your land. The Lord will give the ends of the earth for his son's possessions, and establish the Messiah in his house and his kingdom forever." As we have seen, the expectation of a sovereign, victorious Messiah is illustrated with extraordinary detail in the Old Testament. It is precisely because of this exceptional scriptural backing, remember the 80 prophecies, that the Jewish people living contemporaneously with Jesus zealously anticipated a glorious king and have held on to this belief until this present day. However, what about the sacrificial lamb prophecies like Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22? Wasn't the Messiah supposed to die the first time and come back as the Lord of glory in his second advent? In addition to answering these pressing questions, we will also examine prophecies in the New Testament to show that the messianic belief was consistent between the Old and New. Thank you for watching and have a blessed day.